As a new member of the Senate, I arrived thinking that all of the problems surrounding Katrina and the response were well in hand. And then I had an opportunity to work with the senator from Louisiana on the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, and more importantly, her subcommittee that took on the responsibility of trying to sort out the bureaucratic bungling that costs lives and, more important, continues to impact the quality of life for thousands of people that she goes to work for every single day. There are so many things wrong with what government did in this instance. This report, which the subcommittee co-chairman will lay out for you, is a damning indictment of the continued incompetence of FEMA as it relates to housing needs of people in the most dire circumstances imaginable. And it is with a lot of hard work by staff, a lot of hard work and perseverance and tenacity by Senator Landrieu that we have arrived at this day where we now can document the ongoing problems, the tragedies and the failures surrounding giving people a roof over their head who had lost the roofs over their head through no fault of their own. Senator Landrieu.
Thank you so much, Senator McCaskill. I am very honored to have this senator with a great deal of background and experience on auditing and oversight joining this subcommittee, and really appreciate her input and congratulate her on the new chairmanship of a new subcommittee on Homeland Security that will be reviewing contracting. She is going to be one busy senator, and I am looking forward to the reports that will, I'm sure, come our way on the mismanagement of contract after contract, not only as it relates to FEMA, but in many other parts of the government. Let me begin by thanking Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins, who, without their support, this subcommittee would never have been formed. Without their support, this report would never have been written. And without their support, we would not have the funding to conduct the first comprehensive and only comprehensive investigation of the housing catastrophe that ensued after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita struck the Gulf Coast, Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama within 3 weeks of each other, two of the most powerful storms, but what really, in the history of recent history, but what really turned this these storms into just catastrophic disasters was the failure of basically the federal flood protection system that collapsed. And as a result, 250,000 homes were destroyed in virtually a weekend. And that's the Louisiana number alone. The federal response to that reality was on the first day and until the end of President Bush's administration, the response of denial, denial, denial. And this report will clarify in the one area on housing that support that fact. This 9-month investigation is both a conclusive analysis of what went wrong throughout the previous administration's failed disaster response, and I want to say, as importantly, a blueprint for reform in the future. We wanted this report not just to be an indictment, and it's a damning indictment. That is what Senator McCaskill said, and it is true. But we also did this report so it could be a blueprint for reform, a platform to build on so we don't make the same mistake again. Because as sure as the two of us are standing here, unfortunately, some community, and it could be a large urban metropolitan area or vast swaths of rural areas, will be devastated sometime in the future, either by a hurricane, a tsunami, or an earthquake. So there is some urgency, if not a terrorist disaster. There is some urgency to get this right, and this report is hoping, that is our great hope, that it will give the Obama administration and a new coming incoming administration that is not, in my view, in denial, an opportunity to get it right. Let me just hit briefly a few points and then about the substance of the report, and then I will answer your questions. I know that this is going to make the senator jump, but actually $15 billion plus was spent in inadequate housing plans for the citizens of the Gulf Coast. A great deal of that money, and we're trying to get a fine-tuned pencil, is still tied up in the trailers here, Donnie, if you'll pull those up. The over-reliance on trailers, Senator McCaskill, which was their only plan, and unfortunately today seems to be their only plan, trailers and mobile homes that cost anywhere, according to this report, between $59,000 and $100,000 apiece over an 18-month period. Most of these trailers are still being housed in how many sites, Donnie, around the country? 15 sites. The taxpayers are still paying for empty, dilapidated trailer storage. And the housing plan that we discovered that FEMA had when Katrina hit, and the saddest part is they still have today, 4 years later, it'll be 4 years in August, is that trailers still remain the bulk of their plan. Wholly inadequate, wholly expensive, and for the citizens in my state that spent even 18 months, a mother and 5 children, or a family and 6 children in a 16-by-6 trailer parked miles away from where their job was, miles away from their church once stood, and miles away from where their neighborhood was, I can say with personal understanding that that is wholly inadequate. So $15 billion was wasted after 6 pieces of legislation and 5 hearings. FEMA is still unprepared to adequately deliver disaster housing during a catastrophic. What's new in this report? It's the first comprehensive analysis, as I said, of a dysfunctional and wasteful housing response. For the first time, it reveals that HUD attempted to play a greater role initially, but their efforts were thwarted. Their efforts were rejected, and there was some resistance at the higher levels of HUD, but the mid-management levels, I think at HUD, understood that FEMA could barely take care of its general requirements to respond, and that HUD, as the housing agency, might be in a better position to do so. But those overtures were rebuffed, and that was a tragic mistake. It describes the reasons for the failure in federal housing response in unprecedented detail. This report will give emails. We did not have to subpoena anyone for this report, but we may consider following up as we move forward for reform. We're grateful for those that went on the record, and it is completely documented here. These are the findings. That FEMA was, and this is not a surprise, were not prepared. We know that. But what is surprising about this report is how far back their own calls went, acknowledging the lack of a catastrophic plan all the way back to 2001. So Katrina hit in, 2002. Katrina hit in 2005. It is now 2009. In 2002, FEMA's own records showed that they were not ready for a catastrophic housing plan, and yet even when the storm hit in 2005, they said they had a plan. The trailers were on the way. And may I remind you all that some of those trailers were laced, we found out, with formaldehyde. How trailers could house 250,000 people who lost their homes when the average manufacturing output in a year in the United States is 300,000, but that breaks down to just a smaller portion of that per month. I don't understand. The second finding was, as I said, FEMA rejected HUD's engagement, kicked off a chain of chaotic events that ensued. Purchase trailers until I say stop was also a finding that we found after the insistence of our committee and other committees that the leadership moved to something else other than trailers. We have documents in here that some of the highest level of FEMA officials basically said continue purchasing trailers till we say stop. Despite our pleas, Senator McCaskill, for them to look at alternatives and provided money for FEMA to look at alternative housing options, for instance, a rental repair unit that might go into the city where properties were destroyed, have the homeowners live on one side, spend a small amount of money repairing a rental unit, providing another family an opportunity to move in. Those suggestions were rejected. And finally, while FEMA insists that trailers will only be used in their last, as a last resort, the fact that alternative programs have not been fully developed suggests that trailers will actually play a major role. And I'll finally conclude and then open for questions. We asked FEMA to give us a report. Actually, Congress demanded that FEMA report on this issue by July of 07. They missed the first deadline, they missed the extension, and then amazingly and really tragically and shamefully, at 10:23 on a Friday evening on January 16th, they turned in a report, Senator McCaskill, basically as the Bush administration was walking out of the door. It really is a tragic indictment of the failure of the previous administration to recognize that government does need to work, that in times of catastrophe and great challenge, government must do its part. And this report shows that in the area most important to people reestablishing their lives, their livelihoods, and their communities, whether it was St. Bernard or New Orleans or Jefferson Parish or Cameron Parish or right now what's happening in Galveston or Waveland, Mississippi, that government failed to provide the very basics. So there'll be other reports on the schools and on the libraries and on the police stations. There'll be other reports as presented last night by the media about the dysfunction of the FEMA office itself, the sexual harassment complaints that have been filed. But suffice it to say that this is a comprehensive finding that I'm glad that my committee could spend some time. And I just want to thank the senior member of the committee, the staff, Michael Alexander, who's Chief of Staff for Homeland Security Committee, and his support, Charlie Martell, our Chief Investigative Counsel, Alan Kahn, our Senior Counsel, and of course Donnie Williams, our lead staff person, Ben Billings, and Amanda Fox. And the professional staff is here to answer any questions that you all might have. Senator McCaskill might have to slip out. Please feel free to do so. But let me open for any questions that you all might have.
If I could just add one comment. If I think if a year goes by and we haven't sold those trailers, then we will be just as angry at this administration as we are the previous. $100 million a year taxpayers are paying to store these trailers. That price tag alone is unacceptable.
Senator,
Bruce?
you did say you were going to look at some of the accusations of sexual harassment in front of the New Orleans office.
Yes, it was very disturbing to see the story of the lack of functioning of a FEMA office that I understand has 1,400 employees. I think the people in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama would be shocked to hear that there are so many people doing so little. And then a couple of those people are doing some things that they shouldn't be doing. So I think that beyond any doubt, it would be appropriate for the for Doug Whitmer to step down, and I am calling for his resignation. It is just the straw that broke the camel's back, and I just can't even begin to understand what 1,400 employees are doing in that office, and now to find out that there were not one not a dozen, but 30 complaints against this one employee. And I do think that Secretary Napolitano, and I'm sure she's already thought of this, and will do a complete review from top to bottom of the FEMA leadership and sort out those that do not want to help, those that are incapable, incompetent, and not doing their job, and fire them, and then keep people who want and believe in the mission of FEMA, which is really a very noble mission. You know, contrary to what some on the opposite side of the aisle say, that everything has to be handled by the private sector, we have seen that ideology run this country into the ground. It has to be a balance between the private sector and the public sector. And in order for the private sector to function well and at its highest level, government must do the same. And when government fails, the private sector can in fact run amok. We have seen examples of extraordinary waste, fraud, and abuse in the contracting, but in this case, it is actually now in the management of that office. So I'm calling for his immediate resignation and actually asking the Secretary of Homeland Security, who was briefed on this report, as well as was the Secretary of HUD before we released it, to look into other allegations, and I'm certain that they will. It seems to us, based on this report and others and countless hearings, that FEMA was anemic and had been defanged when President Bush came into office. Purposely. They, again, don't believe in government. They appointed someone that used to run the Arabian Horse Association and, you know, put this person in charge of an agency where really people do depend on them, life and death, etc. But in addition, when 9/11 hit, which was a year into President Bush's term, there was, of course, an effort to try to re-scramble the United States defenses against such attacks. And it was a perfect storm to make FEMA even worse, if you will, because it got swallowed up by a very large bureaucracy at just the wrong time. And then it struggled to get a place at the table. It was taken away from the table. It wasn't listened to. And with the president's position, which was clear and unmistakable of denial, 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 nothing's wrong on our end, it's just the people down on the Gulf Coast that can't seem to manage here, it just completely could not function. So your answer is, I think we need to carefully review what is the best way for us to get FEMA back up, staffed, led, resourced, so that it can do its job. And whether that is in Homeland Security, in a new led agency by newly, focused and supported and led by Secretary Napolitano, that may be what we should do. But I think and if not, then it could be a standalone independent agency with maybe a fresh name, et cetera, wouldn't be a bad idea, because it has earned itself, and I say earned itself, a reputation of total incompetence, which it deserves. So I think a review, I understand there may be a bill that was filed today by Congressman Obastar to make it independent, and I welcome that debate. I, at this point, am remaining neutral because, again, my position, and I think it's appropriate for me, is it doesn't matter to me whether it's in Homeland Security or independent as long as it works. My job is to tell people what's broken, how it needs to be fixed, because the people in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama have really suffered because of incompetence. And let me say that people in Iowa have suffered. People in Kansas have suffered. There have been some good things that have come out, as the President mentioned about, is it Greensburg, Kansas? And that's encouraging and exciting, but I bet you if you all went and asked the people in Kansas and Iowa and other places, they could tell you horror stories just like recorded in here.
How much of this was Stafford Act or even the interpretations by FEMA?
Thank you, Jerry. That's a very good question, and I'd like to get this out on the record. What we have now concluded is that the Stafford Act is wholly inadequate for catastrophic disasters in any number of ways that are apparent. But the Act could have, had the lawyers interpreted the law more liberally, had they been more flexible in their regulations, could have been a great deal more assistance than they were. So first thing I think the Secretary needs to do is fire most of the lawyers at FEMA, or really give them a very thorough review, because that is where we think a lot of the problem resided, both at the legal department in FEMA that turned itself into no, 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 no. And as you know, when you hire a lawyer, just think about when a business hires a lawyer or a person hires a lawyer. You hire a lawyer to basically tell you yes. As a client, when you hire a lawyer, you say, I have a problem, I need to move from A to B, you tell me how to get there. That's what lawyers normally do. And that's why lawyers serve a good function. They find a way, a legal, appropriate way. These lawyers found every way to say no, 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 and no to the people of the Gulf Coast. So the lawyers need to be reviewed. And then OMB played a tragic, in their effort to save money, they squandered more than they could have ever imagined or hoped to save, because they were so short-sighted, they were penny-wise and pound-foolish. That is the trouble with the Bush administration's empty call for fiscal responsibility, because they were the least fiscally responsible in the way they operated as far as the housing plan for the city, and then blamed us for the wasteful spending when it was strictly at their doorstep. Did you have a question?
Yeah, but with HUD and DHS officials planning to come to the area, what do you expect and what do you think?
Well, let me say how pleased and proud I am that they actually didn't even need a letter from our office, which was so refreshing, that they came to their own understanding that this was a problem and decided on their own to come together, which I have to say is just, I know it seems like a little thing to people, but it's a big thing to this senator and to the people that I represent, that they came together on their own in a creative way to say, look, you know, it's FEMA and HUD have got to come together in a new partnership. In fact, I believe they have already, within the first few weeks of this administration, signed a memorandum of understanding between these agencies that we begged the last FEMA and HUD to do, and they kept resisting. So within 3 weeks of President Obama becoming president, or a month, they have come to an understanding, and then shortly after decided they would come together to tour, which is unprecedented. I don't remember a time when we had two cabinet secretaries come together, which in itself is an indication that they get it. They get it, that housing has to do with schools, and schools have to do with infrastructure, and you know, housing has to do with jobs, and that it's all interrelated, and that the agencies of the federal government need to act in better partnership together. So I am very encouraged. And again, as Senator McCaskill said, we're going to hold this administration to a high standard. But let's not put this blame at the President Obama's feet. This report is about the failed policies of the past. And I hope that next year we'll have a good report about the blueprint for the future. Anybody else? Donnie, is there anything we should show them up here that... Oh, this was just the overview of giving you all. No picture can tell what it looked like, but just remember that this was just a huge and unprecedented flood. These are not a clear picture, but it's hard to describe the difference between a regular hurricane and a catastrophic disaster. And again, this is the timeline that the reporters can see. People think that they were just kind of, and even I said, you know, the federal government was caught off guard. These things happen. Sometimes you're not prepared. But what I didn't realize is in 2002, their own internal reports showed them that they were unprepared. Then, just amazingly and tragically, in the summer of the storm, Exercise Pam was conducted. Is that on here, Nani? The Exercise Pam was conducted, which you all have reported about. They said in that report that basically 250,000 people would be homeless. They said that 20,000 people would be killed. We only lost 1,900, so but 20,000 people could have died. But they were accurate on the houses lost. But from this point and even prior, we're going back to find out, until that point, they virtually did nothing. So when the storm hit, they just started ordering trailers with no thought to how expensive it would be, where they would put them, how expensive it would be to set them up, what the capacity is to manufacture them to begin with. And I can understand even that overreaction. But after a year of being able to think, okay, what else can we do? They still refuse to move forward with any common sense, efficient, effective housing plan for people, whether they were senior citizens or a child that lived with his grandmother in a wheelchair, or people that lived in a high-rise or people that rented. All they basically did was just continue to say trailers, trailers, trailers. So we're going to go find out some more about these trailers, and hopefully that'll lead us to whatever motive we can find.